Welcome to the next episode of the AI-driven Enterprise podcast, where we dive deep into the realm of AI, exploring its boundaries and future promises. Today, I'm really thrilled to have Andrew Pery, the AI ethics evangelist at ABBYY. Andrew really brings a unique perspective, blending his career in both product marketing with his deep understanding of AI technology, and of course, privacy law, as he is a certified data privacy professional. In this episode, we'll unravel the complexities of AI ethics and legislation with Andrew, who is at the forefront of ABBYY's global initiative promoting the development of trustworthy artificial intelligence. His expertise in navigating the intersection of law and AI technology is pivotal in today's tech-driven world. So as we embark on this enlightening conversation, remember that this is just the first half of our discussion with Andrew. Stay tuned for a gripping cliffhanger that will surely leave you eagerly waiting for the next installment of our exploration into the ethical and legal dimensions of AI. Join us on this journey to understand how AI can be aligned with and enhance privacy rights and the broader implications for our society and businesses. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today's episode. With me, I have Andrew Pery, the ethics evangelist of ABBYY. Andrew, thank you very much for joining our podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on. Like I've already told our audience in the short introduction, we've got a really interesting topic today, all about AI legislation and the inevitable regulations of AI that are definitely becoming an impact on businesses already today. I'm really excited to talk through some of these with you. I don't know if you want to do some brief introductions about yourself before we dig into some of the very interesting topics that we've got prepared to talk about.
Maxime, thank you for this opportunity to engage in this conversation with you about the impact of AI technologies and how do we ensure that we put some guardrails to ensure that we mitigate any potential harmful impacts of AI. Yeah, in terms of background, my background is really at the intersection of technology and law. I am a certified data privacy professional, both in the EU and in Canada. And I do have a background in intellectual property law. And within ABBYY, I'm really focusing on how do we operationalize ethical AI best practices to ensure that we deliver to our customers technologies that not only provide, obviously, business improvement and business outcomes, but also to do so in an ethical and responsible manner. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you, Maxime. Again, thank you for the opportunity.
No, my pleasure having you on. So with that, maybe let's dive into the very first topic that we wanted to cover together. So over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about this with very many people, made a few posts on LinkedIn as well that actually drew quite a lot of attention with regards to, okay, what is large language models? What are the foundational models? And what are some of the things that people have to keep in mind when they start working with them or actually aspire to working with them? One of the topics that definitely always comes up when I then have the conversation with analyst groups, with customers, is definitely, okay, what about regulation? Everybody's seeing the news. Everybody's hearing about it. We've all heard about hallucinations, some of the dangers that have already happened, companies actually pushing back on their employees, leveraging generative AI in general to actually mitigate some of these things, especially as regulation, as compliance laws are coming into effect. So what's your take on this, Andrew? What is really driving the AI regulation?
I think it's a really good question. There are several reasons that drive the need for AI regulation. I just love to highlight maybe a few of those, I think, most critical ones. And I know the first one is potentially quite obvious, and that is the sheer magnitude of AI technology. PwC projects that by the end of the decade, AI technologies and services will contribute as much as almost $16 trillion to the global domestic product. So it's huge. It's impacting virtually every dimension of our lives. And it's not something that you want to leave to a voluntary codes of conduct or self-regulation. It's just way too big. And so regulation is certainly, I think, an important element to ensure that we harmonize the applications of AI technologies globally and deliver meaningful regulations that, on the one hand, promotes innovation, but on the other hand, also to ensure that we mitigate potential harms. The second, I think, is equally important, and that is the socioeconomic impact of AI technology. And a report by Goldman Sachs projects that by the end of the decade, some potentially 300 million jobs could be subsumed by AI technologies. And so that requires a whole of government and whole of society effort to ensure that we, on the one hand, obviously leverage the utility of AI, but also ensure that we effectively transition for the jobs of the future and to upskill employees for the jobs of the future. I just want to emphasize that when we talk about transformative initiatives like this, it's not a zero-sum game. In fact, the World Economic Forum, on the other hand, projects that by the end of the decade, there could be up to 97 million net new jobs created by virtue of innovations around AI technologies. But that has to be balanced, and regulation certainly is an important component of that.
That's interesting, Andrew. You mind if I just pick in on that particular one that you were just talking about? It came up in conversation as well, actually, just this week on the topic of, okay, what is going to happen with people's jobs? How should they look at this? And the specific question that I was asked was, okay, what do you think about the evolution? Will the workforce that is definitely in I would say the generation that's older, will they have more difficulty to adapt to this yet another technological change? Or will it create more opportunity? I'm of the position that I think for the next couple of years, there will definitely be difficulty for a lot of people as they try to upskill themselves or reskill themselves to be able to work with these tools. But I think afterwards, once we see really good implementations of this technology and just embracing the power of artificial intelligence, specifically what I'm referring to is its reasoning capabilities that are now definitely being much more prominent as one of the main outcomes, one of the main benefits of these large language models that everybody's talking about. And as we embed that inside of existing products and existing technology, I think it will give a new user interface, a new type of experience, the way people can interact with technology, which will actually open it up to even more people than we have today, even with low code, no code. But it will be a hard couple of years before we get there, and people will still have to be quite technical to leverage it and stay relevant within the market. That's where I think that particular
I couldn't agree with you more on that particular reasoning. And that is why I certainly would agree with you that in the short term, there would be some disruption. This is where I think not only regulation comes into perspective, but also policy. And that is, I think we're going to see, I think, people displaced. And I think there needs to be an undercurrent of governmental policy that will make it easier for folks to make this transition happen. And it might involve implementation of social safety net programs to consolidate existing social safety net programs. But I might be out there in terms of where I think it should go, but potentially a guaranteed annual income that will consolidate the various social safety net programs. But the guaranteed annual income would be designed in such a way that as we make this transition and people acquire these skills, then of course the guaranteed annual income supplement could be obviously adjusted as individuals are able to secure jobs and move into into this new environment. But clearly in the short run, I think that there is consensus that there's going to be some disruption. We need to manage that disruption to make sure that we don't marginalize people on the one hand, at the same time to have programs in place that really incent folks to make this transition happen.
Yeah. And being a millennial, I've seen a few of these things happen throughout my short lifespan on this particular planet. But I think every single time we've been in front of this kind of definitely generational shift almost. It's happened. It's the thing I'm seeing is it's just happening a lot faster than it used to. That technology is evolving. And then for that reason, we also have these generational shifts of what people are able to work with, how fast they have to upskill themselves. That's also becoming faster and faster that they have to do that. But in my personal view, every single time after that, we've gone through that small bit of pain, it becomes a lot better. There's a lot more opportunity for everybody to then just get access and actually be able to have access to the market much more than they do today. So I'm quite optimistic. I think you're absolutely right. I think it will be difficult for a lot of people. We need to have those social safety nets in place. But I think after that, it will be even better.
And
than
of course, history is any sort of guidepost to us. We've seen these transformational events occur, and it creates net new opportunities. And you've seen the pace of growth in terms of the gross domestic product, the standard of living And I think this technology could potentially unleash enormous productivity, as well as, I think, lift people up and remove the highly repetitive, labor-intensive, error-prone kind of jobs and create potentially more meaningful, I
Absolutely.
think, opportunities for all of us to enjoy the benefits of AI technology. But that sort of leads me into sort of the third sort of challenge, and that is, as you also pointed out, Maxime, is just a sheer pace of innovation. I think many
Hmm.
of you might have heard of Jeffrey Hinton, who is a Google scientist, and he recently left Google because he expressed some serious concerns about the lack of guardrails around how quickly, especially more innovative technologies like generative AI is being introduced to the marketplace and being commercialized without those guardrails. And he believes technology is moving so quickly that it could potentially eclipse human knowledge, but also it potentially can create nefarious uses of AI technology. So that also brings into a perspective of putting in place meaningful, common sense regulation to protect against the more nefarious potential applications of technology that could lead into potentially significant harmful impacts. And then finally, I think, which is, I think, perhaps the most important issue, is the potential inherent bias of AI. And we've seen this obviously as AI technology has evolved across multiple applications, such as hiring, criminal justice system, eligibility for social services and loans, where notwithstanding the strength of the AI and algorithm produces disparate impact, especially impacting disadvantaged groups. And there's a great sort of analysis by Cathy O'Neill, who is a data scientist. She wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, and she highlights a number of key reasons for AI regulation. The first is that AI is opaque. We have very limited visibility into how AI technology actually works and the outputs that it generates. The second is perhaps even more challenging, and that's for the average consumer, the outputs are uncontestable. Consumers have no idea how the AI system generates the results that it's generating. And therefore, from a protection of consumer rights, for consumers are at a definite disadvantage of trying to prove the connection between the outputs of the AI technology and the damage or the harms that it potentially can cause. And so there are a number of initiatives underway to shift the burden to the producers of AI technology, whereby there's a presumption of harm in the event of potentially adverse outcomes. And it's probably up to the developers to disprove the connection between the AI outputs and harms. But also it brings into perspective another important dimension, and that's data governance, the need to ensure that the outcomes are fair. And so fairness is a significant component of mitigating potential adverse impacts associated with AI technology. And fairness have to be defined in the context of meaningful regulations to ensure that there's clarity around what is fair, what is unfair, what are potentially harmful impacts of AI technology, and what are some of the principles, some of the values that must be incorporated into regulation that protects consumers on the one hand, but also it's important to keep in mind that we also make sure that we want to potentially, on an ongoing basis, promote innovation. Those are the four, I would say, key pillars, if you will, for the need for regulation. And I think we're seeing clear evidence of that already. So the EU is at the vanguard of AI regulations, and they've proposed a regulation called the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. It's in the process of being reviewed by the EU Parliament and the Commission. And it's an expectation that by the end of this summer, as early as possible, there would be first meaningful, comprehensive regulation of AI technology. But we see AI initiatives, regulatory initiatives also underway in the US and across many different jurisdictions.
That's interesting, especially the contestable one. When you mentioned there is definitely something that I've seen too. Just the fact of basically how quickly suddenly AI, which is, let's be honest, the technology is the umbrella term for a lot of different technologies, but let's just talk about it in general. But suddenly this technology has gotten into the hands, or at least into the minds of so many people very quickly over the last year, that it is incredibly important that people also understand or are able to contest the outcomes of it, because not everybody is, like we talked about before, as well educated when it comes to these types of technologies and the biases that they have, the hallucinations that they can have, the adverse effects that they can have,
Mhm.
but also just the fact that they don't always produce the right answer to any question that you might ask it. So I think that's a really
Yeah,
good point to add.
that clearly, I think one of the cornerstone issues around regulating AI is how to protect consumer rights, their security, economic rights, and also their privacy rights.
Awesome. I think we've got a next question that I wanted to ask you lined up. And as you and I have been talking about legislation, I've been reading into it as well to just stay informed about what is developing, how is this going to work. I read through the compromise text of the EU as well. And there were several call outs to high risk AI systems. And actually, a very few popular ones that a lot of people know fall into that category specifically. So, could you help me enlighten the audience today, Andrew, about what exactly are high risk?
And you mentioned about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and I'll talk about that in terms of its fundamental approach to regulating AI. But I think for the audience, I think it's important to perhaps have a level set as to what is the current AI landscape that kind of defines the different categories of AI systems. And generally speaking, AI technologies fall into these two categories. The first of which is narrow AI applications. And we are familiar with that. The AI technology has been around for some time, especially specific use cases or purpose-built applications, such as intelligent document processing or robotic process automation. And these technologies do things extremely well. They're designed to support very specific activities with a high degree of accuracy and recognition, repeatability and scalability. In fact, much better than what humans can achieve, right? And so typically these kinds of technologies, as I mentioned, intelligent document processing and robotic process automation, search technologies, are typically not considered to be high risk type of AI systems. But then there's another category, which is general artificial intelligence, which kind of, much more advanced technology that's based on advanced neural networks and technologies that kind of mimics, human cognitive intelligence. And certainly generative AI applications, large language models such as ChatGPT fall into this category where they actually analyze a large corpus of text and make predictions using natural language analysis in terms of their outcome. And they tend to produce what appears to be really compelling results, but at the same time, in many cases, it's simply inaccurate results. As you mentioned earlier, I think in the introduction, some of these technologies tend to hallucinate, really providing convincing results,
Mhm.
but clearly inaccurate results and potentially misleading results. And I think it is here where I think there's a need for more rigorous regulation of AI technologies that would preserve and also protect against potential harms. And this is what the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a proposed regulation, is designed to address. And they have taken a really, I think, a rigorous approach in regulating AI by creating a prescriptive model where they classified AI systems into four distinct categories. At the top, they define what's called unacceptable risk or prohibited AI systems. So these, for example, include social scoring applications that, in a sense, manipulate social behaviors, real-time biometric systems, especially in public spaces, subliminal techniques that potentially impact vulnerable groups. So these sort of categories of AI systems are considered to be prohibited. And for each of these categories, the regulation imposes significant administrative fines and penalties in the event if such technologies are being introduced. The second category includes what the EU regulation defines as high-risk systems. And these risk systems really are designed to prevent or preclude potential adverse impacts on consumers. For example, applications that may impact health and security and privacy rights, economic rights. For example, systems that really adjudicate eligibility for loans, employment, education, immigration, criminal justice, right? And so for these kinds of applications, the regulation imposes significant obligations on the part of providers to ensure that the systems that they produce and bring to market mitigate those harms. And one of the important aspects of this is what's called ex ante conformance testing. So before they launch or introduce a product to the market, they have to provide evidence in terms of quality assurance, risk mitigation, and risk mitigation measures to demonstrate and to certify that the systems that providers introduce are providing accurate results and reliable results. In addition to that, the regulation imposes on providers obligations of transparency, accountability, explainability of AI systems, also the ability to ensure that consumers have access to the outputs, then can essentially have the ability to question the outputs of the AI systems. So this regulation creates a robust regulatory framework for developers and providers of AI systems to have responsible measures in place and accountability measures to ensure that the AI systems provide meaningful and measurable and accurate results. Then the third category is really minimal or no risk AI systems where there is no significant potential risks. For example, chatbots fall into this category, and the obligation is for providers to communicate with prospective users that they are communicating with a chatbot. And then finally, no-risk AI systems, where there are no specific restrictions, but the recommendation is that nonetheless, organizations should implement voluntary codes of conduct, which makes good business sense. I think from this perspective, the EU AI regulation really imposes a rigorous framework of classifying AI systems, imposes on providers significant obligations for accountability and transparency, auditability and traceability of AI systems, and as well as to ensure that consumers are protected from the potential harmful impacts, and they have a means by which they can certainly enforce their rights. And of course, it's backed up by significant administrative fines and penalties. So it's a comprehensive regulation, and it could, in fact, become the template for other jurisdictions to follow, as we've seen with EU's initiative around the General Data Protection Regulation.
That's really interesting. And I think actually one of my takeaways of how quickly the EU is responding to this is just the fact that it must be very high priority, obviously, because usually I don't see the politics working this quickly on a certain topic. What also actually reminded me, just making a reference for the techies out there. I don't know, Andrew, you're definitely a technologist, but I also don't know if you're a fan of science fiction. But when you were talking about the unacceptable risk and the high risk categories, that actually reminded me of episodes I've seen in, for example, Black Mirror, where there's social scoring, and basically you are retrofit almost or brainwashed if you don't fit the social mold anymore. And that's purely based on social scoring, based on AI. And we've seen these episodes go back many years, but it now seems like it's almost becoming a possible reality. It's not a reality, but it's a possible one. So I think this is very positive that the governments are definitely taking action to make sure that these kind of things simply cannot happen, that they're there before it even could become a reality. Wow, that's been a riveting conversation so far. The need for regulation in AI due to the magnitude and socioeconomic impact of technology is really some of the main topics I love covering in this part of the episode. Potential disruption to jobs, the importance of social safety nets, and the impact of AI bias. It's really interesting to see how all of this is being impacted by the advancements within technology. So we'll continue to explore the categories of the AI EU Act in part 2 of this conversation. So just to reference back to the last question I was asking to Andrew, making references to Black Mirror and other kind of episodes of science fiction, the question that we'll ask is, will this kind of social engineering really become a reality? Well, that's exactly what you're going to be able to find out in the next episode of the AI-Driven Enterprise. Thanks for joining, and looking forward to seeing you again.